All right. So our fourth theory of perception is the intentionalist theory. The intentionalist theory is another representationalist theory of perception. Uh, Again, this meaning that knowledge is not direct; it's something direct and objectively of the world. It's something represented to the mind, and it can still be objective, but it's not of the world as it is without any mediation, right? Any mediation in the mind. Right? So the intentionalist theory is a lot like the adverbialist theory, uh, since it is representationalist as well, and particularly in the fact that um, what it says is that all that actually exists in a perception is mind-dependent relations, i.e. intentions, right? From the mind imposing itself on the world through the senses. Right? So rather than taking this red cap and having the baseline experience and then this being modifying that baseline experience when we focus in on it and apply concepts over top of it to come to perceptual knowledge, instead what it's saying is that until we develop those concepts, right, we can't have perceptual knowledge. We can still have perceptual experiences insofar as we interact with the world, but knowledge only becomes available to us through mediation with concepts. Right? Therefore, nothing is directly known of the world as it is, merely the mind's representation of the world. Right? So these representations tell us things about the world. In fact, a lot of the times, the intentionalist theory of perception is called the aboutness theory, right? Because what we know is about the world. Right? We have commonly agreed upon concepts, things like color schemes and whatnot, that tell us things about the world, and they're true of the world. But since it's not known directly, it's mediated or represented through these concepts, which we then apply and superimpose, I suppose would be a better word, onto our perceptions. This is what we know about the world and its objects. Um, so we know the world indirectly through these representations. Now, in this case, the two levels of experience um, for of perceptual experience and knowledge. Right? The first level, perceptual experience, is non-relational, just like with the adverbialist theory, and fundamentally a matter of representing ordinary objects in certain ways. Right? Representing the objects in the world mediated through the concepts. Uh, so again, going back to comparing it with the adverbialist theory, rather than starting with a baseline experience, instead what we're doing is we're taking our concepts, superimposing them onto the objects, and superimposing them onto the objects, right? We just see the objects as they are, represent them through concepts rather than having the third step of mediating the concepts through some baseline experience, and then that's how we know the world. Right? And then secondly, the second level is that the character of knowledge is explained by its representational nature, by representing this thing as red, right? Representing this thing as cylindrical. Right? With the concept, then now that we have the concept, we can have perceptual knowledge. Right? We can't even really have fully formed perceptual experiences, according to the intentionalist theory, because without concepts, because concepts are what give an experience its robustness. Um, so one way of thinking about the distinction between the intentionalist theory and the adverbialist theory is that the adverbialist theory is saying that yes, we do experience things these way, we represent it to ourselves through these concepts, but the experiences are there and they do provide some form of knowledge, right? Even without full representation. Concepts give the robustness to the representation in the adverbialist theory and help us identify sort of the limits of the various forms of sensory knowledge, right? And overlap. In the intentionalist version, right, until we have the concepts, we cannot have knowledge, right? We can only have vague experiences, even, right? This is why. So on the this is why older intentionalist theories, like G.M. Anscombe's, would say that babies do not have any sensory knowledge, right? Because in order to have sensory knowledge, they need to have concepts on which to represent to themselves in their minds. Right? Instead, all they have is just like basically sensory overload. It's just a mishmash. It's meaningless sensory information, and it's meaningless because they have no means of representing it to themselves in a meaningful way. That's the role that concepts play. Uh, so without the concepts, it's just feeding and going back, feeding and going back, feeding and going back. You have experience, but no knowledge. And even that experience is undefined because there's no concepts to superimpose upon it to give it order and sense.